read in Isaiah chapter 57, verse 15. And it says, "For thus says the high and lofty one, who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in the high and holy place, with him who has a contrite and humble spirit, to revive the spirit of the humble, and to revive the heart of the contrite ones." Two statements there I want you to pay attention to. The first is God speaking of himself. He says, "I dwell in the high and lofty space." That is a sense of God telling us that he dwells in a space that is way beyond everything. In theological terms, we say that God is transcendent. God is above everything. There is no limit to him, and there is no space that he does not fill. God is transcendent. It is this transcendent God who is eternal, who created the world. Of course, if you are eternal and you create a world which has a beginning, you have to find a way to relate to the world, because the world is not eternal. And you create human beings who are not eternal. So how does an eternal God then relate to us who are not eternal? So in the verse, he says, "I dwell in the high and lofty place." But not only that, he says, "I dwell with him who has a contrite and a humble spirit." So God, who is transcendent, is also present in our lives. He's not so high and lofty that he cannot reach out to us where we are. And this dynamism of an eternal God who is beyond anything, and an eternal God who is within our lives and present in our lives, is the story of Christianity. That the God who is above everything is present in our lives. He's an eternal God, yet he interacts with us and inhabits time. And every human experience we have is based on time. We are celebrating 50 years of somebody's ministry, life in ministry. That's time. It can be calculated. You cannot celebrate anything with God. God has no celebration. He has no birthday. He has no anniversary. He has nothing to celebrate, because there is nothing to mark his time. He lives in eternity and has no time to be demarcated and measured. And so when God reveals himself to Moses, he says, "I am. I am the one who was, is, and will be." That is the closest in human language that we can describe God. Was, because human beings cannot think of anything that has no was. Was is, used to be, is, and will be. But the reality is, God has no used to be. God has no history. He has no past, and he has no future. There is no future he's occupying or aspiring to get into, and there is no past that he doesn't participate in. He lives in an eternal now. So he calls himself the I am. I am what? Now, in our sense, you may think when God says I am, he's saying I am in relation to you. So I am what? I am your life. No. I am what? I am what I am. What God is saying is my I am is not defined by anything outside of myself. I define who I am. Your need does not define who I am. Your prayer does not define who I am. Your struggle does not define who I am. I am not your bread. I am not your water. I am who I am. I am what I am. There is no comparison by which God measures himself except by himself. Now, I'm going to all this distance before I get to my message. Because the God of eternity relates to us in time. I am not eternal. No human being is eternal. Even if you are immortal, you are not eternal. Because there is a beginning of every human being, and there is no beginning of God. One of the certainties I have in life as a person is the certainty of God. I am philosophically convinced of God. I am scientifically convinced of God. And I am spiritually convinced of God. I know him by faith and I know him by intelligence. The God I believe in by faith is a reasonable God that fits into the concept of life at all levels, whether it's philosophical or scientific. God, the eternal, works with us. So having laid that foundation, I'm going to go into a case study of God's relationship with an individual. And we're going to see how the eternal God relates to us in time. Genesis chapter 18, verses 9 to 14. Now let me give you the background of the story before we read it. This is just before Sodom and Gomorrah were about to be destroyed. And Abraham received 3 strangers. They appeared as human beings to Abraham. And when Abraham saw them coming close to where his tent was, he somehow sensed that these were unusual entities and invited them home, made a meal for them, and afterwards they interacted with him. And it is that interaction we are going to read about. Genesis chapter 18, verse 9 to 14. Then they said to him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" So he said, "Here in the tent." And he said, "I will certainly return to you according to the time of life. And behold, Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." Sarah was listening in the tent door, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old and well advanced in age. And Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, "After I have grown old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also?" And the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I bear a child since I'm old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son." Very fascinating conversation. Just something to draw your attention to. Now, if you look at the passage, in verse 9, we read, "They said to him." They said to him. There are 3 people there, and the passage says, "They said to him." So he asks a question, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" So that question is attributed to they, and I will suppose that it's attributed to all the 3 visitors. Then in verse 10, it says, he said. He said. First, they said. Second, verse 10, he said. And this attributed to one person. And then in verse 13, the Lord said. This attributed to Yahweh. So somehow in that gathering, there is God, the eternal one, in human form. This is the pre-incarnate Christ. They said, he said, the Lord said. So this encounter between Abraham and these three men is a direct encounter with God. God, who is eternal, has stepped into human history in a human form to address the question of a person living in time and their expectations. And so, we look at three verses here. The verse 10 reads, "And he said, I will certainly return to you according to the time of life." If you have your Bible, you can underline it. If you don't have a Bible, you can jump on the screen and underline the screen. Everybody say time of life. So he said to him, I will return to you according to the time of life. And behold, Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. So this is a period that the Bible calls the time of life. Verse 11, Abraham and Sarah were old, well advanced and aged, and had passed the age of childbearing. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, after I have grown old. So Sarah is also referring to another time, age and old. And then verse 14, God is speaking, and it says, is there anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. There are three time periods that are mentioned in this encounter. Remember, God is eternal. We are not eternal. We live in time. We age. We grow old. We grow weary. So God says, I'm going to do something for you. And there are three time periods that he's talking about. The first one is the appointed time. Everybody see appointed time? Appointed time means is a place where God meets, where eternity meets time. It's God's time of meeting with us. It's a divine season that has been fixed by God. It's appointed. It's like having an appointment with God. So God says to Sarah or to Abraham, at the appointed time, I have an appointment with you at a certain time. And in that appointed time, you will have a child. The problem with us human beings is we don't know the appointed time, because God sets the appointed time. We have no sense of what the appointed time, because we don't know. He set an appointed time, and he says, at the appointed time, Sarah shall have a child. For every promise of God to you, there is an appointed time. It's a time, it's a season set by God, by himself, without your knowledge, without your agreement. And in that appointed time, he manifests what he says he will do. There is a fixed time for you. But that is not the only time that is in the text. There is the time of life. In verse 10, he says, and I will certainly return to you according to the time of life. And behold, Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. Time of life is the season when things happen. It is the lifespan of a thing and its maturation. So, for example, if I plant corn seed, it's raining now, and a farmer plants corn in the soil, the time of life of the corn to mature is 3 months. I cannot rush it. I cannot speed it up. So when the seed goes to the ground, a time sequence starts. And that time sequence is not based on what God has fixed. It is based on the time sequence when natural things naturally materialize. So God says, my appointed time is going to synchronize with the time of life. There is something I want to do in your life, but it will not be outside of the natural sequence of time when that thing has to happen. So in God's appointed time, there is a time of life. It's a season when things happen. The time of life for a woman to have a child is 9 months. So what God is saying to Sarah is, I have an appointed time with you, but that appointed time is going to happen within the sequence of a natural process that must happen to you. So if you get pregnant today, I will not give you a child tomorrow because you've waited for so long. That child has to follow the time of life. The time of life for the child is 9 months. Because sometimes when you think you've waited so long for God to do something, you think when he starts doing it, he has to speed up the process for you. But God does not speed up the process for you because he has to do it according to the time of life. I know many times we want a sudden miracle. And it's a nice concept to think that things happen suddenly. But I suppose if you get pregnant with a child and 3 months later the child wants to come suddenly, you would rebuke the child because that would be totally outside of the time of life. You're going to tell the child, I've waited so long for you to come. Please stay the time of life. So God is saying to Sarah, I'm going to do something for you, but it's going to follow the time of life. And the third thing is the time of our existence. So there's God's appointed time, there's a time of life, and there is the time of our existence. Sarah says to God, I'm old. I'm old. My existence, it's getting late. It's actually too late. That's my existence. That's the time frame I live in. Time frame of my existence says that it's too late for this to happen. I know if this had happened a bit earlier, it could be possible. So many times when we look at our life, we look at a time of our existence. I'm old. I'm tired. I've waited too long. I think it's past the hour. I think it's past the miracle. I think God cannot do it this time. The best time for him to do it is already gone. But God's appointed time has nothing to do with the time of your existence. It has nothing to do with the time of your existence. The time of your existence is the clockwork of your earthly life. But when the eternal God steps into your life, he is able to synchronize all the 3 times. He is able to synchronize his appointed time with the time of life and with the time of your existence. So what seems old and past you becomes possible. And that's what God said, because with God, all things are possible. So although Sarah is well advanced in age, past the age of childbearing, according to the time of her existence. And there are people sitting here who think, according to the time of my existence, it's too late. I took note when Bishop Bismarck introduced his aunt, who is 80-something. He didn't give us the precise 80, but then added, she's single. And everybody laughed. Because we are looking at the time of her existence. And her time of existence says she's too old. But with God's appointed time, she's not too old. And when God decides to visit her in her time, she's going to go through the time of life. That means courtship and friendship and all of that. And go on dates and get to know somebody. Because God is going to have to do it according to the time of life. Now, God is not going to say, oh, she's old, so when she meets somebody today, she has to marry tomorrow. Some of you sisters think you've waited for so long. If you meet somebody today, you have to marry the person tomorrow. God's appointment works with the time of life. No rush. You're going to wait. You're going to be patient. You're going to work the process. You're going to believe God. You're going to go through what you have to go through, so that God will bring the miracle to fullness of maturation. There's nothing more unprofitable than waiting on the Lord for so long and rushing the process. You wait so long, you waited so long, you prayed so long. God starts the process, but you can go through the time of life. You think you have to be exempted from process, but God does not exempt us from process. And I believe if we ask our celebrant Bishop Bismarck, I'm sure there are things happening in your life you wish God had done a bit earlier. You wish you had done it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because you're looking at the time of your existence. And you're thinking, this is too late in my life. And for me too, there are things happening. I say, God, if you are going to do it, why wait till now? But God is not going to rush the process for anyone. I'm reminded of a couple in the Bible. Husband is a priest, believing God for a child, no child, waited, no child, to the extent that people had used the time of her existence to define her status in life. They called her barren, because the time of her existence says you are barren. And then eternity steps into their life. When they're going through the routines of life, eternity steps in, just like in the Abraham story. An angel appears to Zechariah and says, now is the time. Now is the time. Father, God, what kind of God are you? Now is the time. I'm going on retirement, and now is the time for me to have a baby. But that is the appointed time. That's the appointed time. And of course, Elizabeth gets pregnant, and she has to go through the time of life. God doesn't say you waited for so long, so we'll give you exemption from 9-month pregnancy. You do an abridged version of it. You do just 6 weeks pregnancy, and then boom, your child is going to come. Now he says, you're going to go through the process 9 months. And in the 6th month of her pregnancy, another divine appointment takes place. And an angel is dispatched to her cousin called Mary. Another appointment is synchronized, because what Elizabeth is carrying and what God had appointed Zacharias and Elizabeth's child to do has to be synchronized with what Mary's child has to do. Both are working with divine appointment. Did they know? They had no idea. Mary had no idea there was a divine appointment. Elizabeth has no idea there is a divine appointment. But whether you know it or not, there is a divine appointment sometime in your future. where God is going to synchronize every event of time to fulfill his will. And of course, Elizabeth is pregnant for 9 months, delivers. Mary is pregnant with God. And God doesn't rush the time. I mean, if you were God and you were in the human womb, you would say, I created the womb, get me out of here. But the incarnation takes place in the natural process of time. She also goes through her 9 months in the time of life. And divine appointment sets the stage for two men born in proximity to each other, born to similar families, born within similar calendar periods, born within a similar history of Israel, when everybody is anticipating a Messiah showing up. And this first pregnancy is designed to announce what is yet to come. And God works it out. You have no idea the plans God has for you. Eye has not seen, ear has not heard, neither has it entered into the heart of man the things that God has planned for you. Your life is not ordinary. Your life is extraordinary. Your experiences are not ordinary. They are extraordinary. You may not think much of yourself, but God thinks much of you. And he has an appointment with you somewhere in your future. And the thing you are praying for and believing for, he has a schedule for it. It's called the appointed time. I don't control it. I don't know it. But I believe the eternal God, who sees all time as one and participates in human time as if he didn't know. Because when God participates in our life, he doesn't participate with eternity. He participates with time. So he rejoices with us, although he knew it was going to happen. The Lord rejoices, and he acts surprised. Because human beings, we are human beings. The only way we can enjoy something is when we think the person doing it is also enjoying it with us. So when God is doing a miracle for you, he has to enjoy it with the same emotion you are enjoying it. But he knew about it all along. I always liken it to a child who goes to school, does very well in school. In Ghana, we have something called Speech and Prize Giving Day. I don't know whether you have it here. That's the end of the school term, and there are speeches and there are prizes giving to best students. And so if you're a parent and your child comes to you, Mommy, Daddy, guess what? I'm going to get 10 prizes tomorrow, or next week at the Speech and Prize Giving Day. I'm getting a prize in mathematics and English and geography and history and all of that. The child is so excited about, they tell you, you know it. You know it's going to happen. And then you go for the event. And you're sitting down there and your child's name is called. You don't fold your arms and say, yeah, I knew it. I knew it. Yes, you had foreknowledge of it, but you have to participate in time with the child as if you had no knowledge of what was happening. And that's how God deals with us. He rejoices over us as if he had no clue that it was going to happen, but he planned it all along. So when the fullness of time comes, according to the time of life, God will supersede your own time of existence. Whether you were too young for it, too old for it, too inexperienced for it, too unintelligent for it, too uneducated for it. That's what your time of life says. But in God's appointed season, He will synchronize events to bring you to the place He has appointed for you. Tonight, we celebrate a man whose time of life and whose time of existence is miraculous. But God is not surprised with Bishop Bismarck. The Lord is not surprised. He's not shocked. Before he was born, He knew there's an appointment with this boy. And here's the time of your existence. You go through pain, you go through abandonment, being left at school, and you go through trauma and childhood trauma. That's the time of your existence. But superseding all of that, there is a divine appointment. And God brings it to pass. And He doesn't just do it for bishops, because God has no children called bishops. We are all His children. And He may not call you to preach and to reach people, but definitely He has an appointment with you. And not only that, He has an appointment with your children, and He has an appointment with your grandchildren. And may the eternal God, the all-knowing God, the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega, the God who is not surprised, the God who is not shocked, the God who knows our days and has numbered our days, may He guide us and order our steps, so that in every step we take, we come into the fullness of His divine appointment. And we will wait patiently for the time of life, and that no experience we have gone through can cut short the divine purpose for your life. In Jesus' name, God bless you.
We've come to the end of this video. We believe you've been blessed. Remember, God's love is steadfast and unchanging. May His grace and peace be with you always. If you're new here, consider subscribing to stay up to date with our videos. Kindly share this video with your friends and families. You can watch this next video on your screen.